Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You guys sent in some seriously cool research from Assay Genie, and I knew we had to dive right in. It's all about how our cells adapt to crazy situations, like when they're not getting enough oxygen.
A state we call hypoxia.
Right, hypoxia, exactly. So we all know oxygen is essential, but this paper titled Unlocking Cellular Adaptation, the HIF enhancer pathway and its implications in hypoxia response. Well, it just gets into all the awesome ways our bodies deal with it.
It is truly fascinating how resilient our cells can be.
I know, right? You'd think low oxygen would be a total disaster for our cells, but they've got this whole plan figured out, the HIF pathway. It's like, picture a SWAT team, but for your cells.
Yeah.
Ready to jump into action the second things get rough.
That's a great analogy. The HIF pathway, or Hypoxia-Inducible Factor pathway, is like this master controller that sets off all these changes inside the cell when oxygen gets low.
Okay, so the HIF team is on the scene, but then the research mentions this HIF enhancer pathway too. What is that exactly? Do they call for backup or something?
You could say that. The HIF enhancer pathway is it supercharges the HIF pathway. When oxygen levels get really low, that's when this enhancer kicks in.
Okay, now you've got me hooked. So spill the beans. How does this supercharge actually work?
Well, it all starts with this enzyme called HIF prolyl hydroxylase, or PHD for short. Now, normally, PHD's job is to keep the HIF team in check. It basically tags HIF for, well, destruction. That way, the response stays balanced when oxygen levels are normal.
So PHD is like the supervisor making sure the HIF team doesn't go overboard. Gotcha. But what happens when oxygen actually does drop?
That's when things get really interesting. See, in hypoxia, these molecules, reactive oxygen species, or ROS, start building up. They're kind of like byproducts of cellular metabolism. Think of them as smoke signals when there's a fire.
So ROS is the 911 call letting everyone know oxygen is low?
Exactly. And here's the key.
Yeah.
These ROS, they actually block PHD, our supervisor, from doing its job. It's like they're tying its hands, preventing it from tagging HIF for destruction.
So the HIF team gets to do its thing without being held back. That's got to be how the cells survive, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, HIF is free to enter the cell's nucleus, its control center, and activate the transcription of specific genes. Basically, it flips the switch on the instructions for building tools that help the cells survive with less oxygen.
Wow, that is seriously impressive. Our cells are way more adaptable than I ever imagined. But you mentioned this enhancer pathway is tightly regulated. Why is that so important?
Well, the HIF enhancer pathway is crucial when oxygen is low, but you don't want it going crazy all the time. Too much HIF activity can actually be harmful. It's all about balance.
Okay, so what keeps this powerful pathway in check? What controls it?
It's a whole web of influences, actually. For instance, there's the PI3K ACT pathway. It's known for its role in cell growth and survival, but it also plays a part in activating the HIF enhancer pathway.
So the pathway responsible for cell growth also helps control the cell's response to low oxygen. It's like everything is connected inside the cell.
It really is.
But is it just signals from outside the cell controlling this pathway? Or do things inside the cell matter too?
Both play a role, actually. You see, when oxygen is low, cells have to change how they make energy. Instead of using the oxygen-dependent TCA cycle, that's how our cells usually produce energy, they have to switch to other methods. And these metabolic changes, they can also affect how active the HIF enhancer pathway is.
So even the way a cell powers itself can affect how it responds to low oxygen. That's crazy.
It is. And then there's epigenetics, which makes things even more intricate.
Epigenetics, that's all about changes that affect gene expression without actually messing with the DNA sequence, right?
Exactly. Think of it like adding notes and highlights to the cell's instruction manual without changing the actual words. Research shows that some specific epigenetic mechanisms can actually affect the HIF enhancer pathway. They can, fine-tune how accessible those enhancer regions are, the stretches of DNA that boost the activity of certain genes, including the ones controlled by HIF.
Wow, this is getting pretty complex. It's like a whole orchestra of cellular processes all impacting this one pathway.
You could say that. It's this incredibly precise system all working together to help the cell adapt to tough situations. And the more we understand this system, the more we realize how important it is in all sorts of research areas.
And that includes human health, right? I'm already starting to see how understanding this pathway could be huge for diseases where oxygen plays a key role.
Absolutely. The implications are vast, impacting everything from cancer biology to cardiovascular research and even regenerative medicine.
All right, well, I'm definitely ready to dive into those applications. Let's start with cancer. How does the HIF enhancer pathway fit into this complex disease?
Well, in cancer, the HIF pathway and its enhancer, they often become dysregulated, meaning they don't function properly.
Hmm.
As tumors grow, they often outgrow their blood supply, which creates these areas of low oxygen within the tumor.
So the cancer cells are basically facing a low oxygen challenge, which triggers the HIF pathway. But what's the problem with that?
The problem is that in many cancers, the HIF pathway, including its enhancer, becomes overactive. This leads to the increased expression of genes that actually help the tumor grow and even spread.
So the pathway that's supposed to help cells survive is actually helping the cancer survive and spread? That's not good.
Not good at all.
Mhm.
And this is exactly why understanding the HIF enhancer pathway is so important. It opens up new possibilities for therapies. If we can develop drugs that specifically target and inhibit this enhancer pathway in cancer cells, we might be able to limit tumor growth and stop it from spreading.
That would be incredible. By understanding how cancer uses this pathway to its advantage, we can develop more effective treatments.
Exactly. And it's not just cancer. The HIF enhancer pathway is also important in cardiovascular research, specifically when it comes to something called ischemic preconditioning.
Ischemic preconditioning, I feel like I've heard of that. Can you remind us what that is?
Of course. Ischemic preconditioning is this, well, kind of counterintuitive phenomenon where short periods of low oxygen can actually protect the heart from more serious damage later on. It's like a training program for your heart, making it stronger and more resistant to damage.
Wait, so briefly, depriving the heart of oxygen can actually make it stronger? That sounds almost unbelievable.
I know, right? But research suggests that the HIF enhancer pathway plays a key role in this. These short bursts of hypoxia activate the HIF pathway, including its enhancer, which triggers changes that ultimately protect the heart from future oxygen deprivation.
So the HIF enhancer pathway is like a personal trainer for the heart, getting it ready for tough times.
Exactly. And this knowledge could be huge for treating heart disease. Imagine being able to use ischemic preconditioning to protect the heart during a heart attack.
That would be a game changer. It seems like we're uncovering a world of possibilities with this pathway. Understanding this one pathway could be the key to treating so many different diseases.
You're absolutely right. And we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to learn about the HIF enhancer pathway and its potential.
Well, I am officially hooked on this topic, but before we get too carried away, let's take a breath and let this all sink in. We've covered a lot of ground already, how this pathway works, what it does in cancer and heart health. When we come back, I want to hear more about its role in regenerative medicine and, believe it or not, even the connection to the microbiome. Stay tuned.
So I know you were pretty curious about the HIF enhancer pathway and, well, how it plays into this whole regenerative medicine thing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's kind of mind-blowing to think we could actually, help our bodies heal and regrow tissues just by tweaking this pathway. It feels like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it? But it all comes down to oxygen. When tissues are damaged, one of the biggest problems is making sure those new cells get enough oxygen to grow.
That makes sense. I mean, oxygen is, essential for cells to survive and grow. So if there's not enough blood flow to the injured area, those cells are in trouble.
Exactly. And that's where our friend the HIF enhancer pathway comes in. Remember, this pathway goes into overdrive when oxygen levels plummet. So when tissues are injured and oxygen is low, boom, the HIF pathway kicks in and sets off a chain reaction to, well, help the body repair itself.
So it's like HIF is the first responder after an injury, rushing in to help the body rebuild.
I like that. And one of the first things HIF does is stimulate angiogenesis. That's the formation of new blood vessels, to bring in oxygen and nutrients to the damaged area.
So HIF is basically laying down new roads to bring in supplies for the reconstruction project. Love that analogy. But is HIF just involved in building blood vessels? Or does it do other things to help with tissue regeneration?
Oh, it does way more than that. HIF also helps produce growth factors and cytokines. Think of them as, like, messengers that coordinate all the cells involved in the repair process. They tell cells to grow, to specialize, and to move where they're needed to rebuild the tissue.
So HIF is like the general contractor, overseeing the entire rebuilding project.
Yeah.
No wonder scientists are so excited about its potential in regenerative medicine.
I know, right? Just imagine. We could use the HIF enhancer pathway to speed up wound healing, maybe repair damaged heart tissue after a heart attack, or even help regrow damaged nerves in people with spinal cord injuries.
The possibilities are pretty mind-blowing. But with a pathway this powerful, I can't help but wonder, are there any risks? How do scientists make sure they're not accidentally causing more harm than good?
You're right to be cautious. There are always risks when we start manipulating biological pathways, especially one as complex as the HIF enhancer pathway. One concern is, well, we might trigger unintended consequences. For example, while activating HIF might help with tissue regeneration, it could also accidentally stimulate tumor growth in some cases. It's like you're trying to hit a target, but you have to be super careful not to hit anything
It's
else.
like walking a tightrope. You have to maintain that balance.
Mhm.
So are scientists exploring different ways to carefully manipulate the HIF enhancer pathway, or is this all just theoretical right now?
Oh no, research is moving really fast in this area, and there's some really exciting approaches being investigated. One promising area is developing drugs that specifically target certain parts of the HIF enhancer pathway. The idea is to fine-tune its activity, to turn it up or down as needed without causing any unwanted side effects.
So it's like finding the right dial to adjust instead of just flipping a switch on or off. Are
Exactly.
there other approaches being explored too?
Absolutely. Scientists are also looking into gene editing techniques to, well, actually modify the activity of the HIF enhancer pathway. This is a more permanent solution, but it has the potential to be incredibly precise, allowing us to target specific cells or tissues.
Gene editing is a pretty powerful tool, and it has a lot of potential for medicine in the future.
It does.
So we've got drugs, gene editing, anything else.
Well, there's also a lot of interest in finding natural compounds that might be able to influence HIF signaling.
Mhm.
A lot of plants and herbs contain molecules that have shown promise in studies, and researchers are working to identify and isolate those compounds that could be developed into safe and effective therapies.
Wow. So we've got synthetic drugs, gene editing, natural compounds. There's a whole toolkit out there. It's amazing to see the creativity and ingenuity that goes into this research. But amidst all this excitement about manipulating the HIF pathway, there's this other connection you mentioned that I'm really curious about, the link between the HIF enhancer pathway and the microbiome. Can you tell me more about that?
Oh, absolutely. It's a fascinating area of research.
Yeah.
So we have trillions of bacteria living in our gut, right? That's what we call the microbiome. And it turns out these bacteria can actually communicate with and influence our cells, including those involved in the HIF pathway.
Wait, really? So these tiny little organisms in our gut could be affecting how our cells respond to oxygen. That is mind-blowing.
It is. Research is suggesting that the gut microbiome can affect HIF activity in a couple of ways. First, those bacteria in our gut, they produce all sorts of metabolites, some of which can directly interact with and change the HIF pathway.
So the microbiome is like this little factory pumping out all these chemicals, and some of them can actually affect how our cells respond to oxygen levels. That's wild. Are there any other ways the microbiome can affect the HIF pathway?
Yeah. The microbiome also plays a huge role in shaping our immune system. And there's growing evidence that the immune system, in turn, can influence how active the HIF pathway is. So it's like this complex web of interactions with the gut microbiome, the immune system, and the HIF pathway all talking to each other.
It's amazing how everything in our bodies is so interconnected. It seems like every time we discover something new, it just opens up a whole new level of complexity.
That's the beauty of biology, isn't it? Yeah. And it's what makes the HIF enhancer pathway so interesting and challenging to study. It's not just one pathway working by itself. It's part of this huge network of interactions that affects everything from how cells survive to how tissues regenerate to our overall health.
I'm starting to see why researchers are so fascinated by this pathway. It's not just about understanding one mechanism, it's about understanding this whole web of connections that keeps our bodies functioning. But with all this talk about manipulating the HIF pathway and using it for therapies, I have to wonder, where do we draw the line between, promoting health and crossing into human enhancement?
That's a really important question. And it's something that scientists and ethicists are definitely thinking about as research moves forward. As we learn more about the HIF enhancer pathway, we're going to face some pretty tough ethical dilemmas. For example, if we can create therapies that speed up wound healing or even regrow tissues, when does that become more than just restoring health? When does it become enhancing human abilities beyond what's considered normal?
That is a tricky question, and there's no easy answer. It seems like as our scientific knowledge grows, so do the ethical challenges we need to address.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so crucial to have open and honest discussions about the ethics of this research. We need to think about not just the scientific possibilities, but also how these discoveries will affect society as a whole.
Mhm.
Who will have access to these new therapies? Will they be used responsibly? These are questions we need to address right from the start.
It's a good reminder that scientific progress isn't just about pushing the boundaries of what we know, it's also about understanding the ethical implications of what we discover. This deep dive into the HIF enhancer pathway has been eye-opening. It's shown me the incredible potential of this research, but also the importance of moving forward carefully and thoughtfully.
I agree. The more we learn about how our bodies work, the more we realize how much we still don't know. And as we explore these mysteries further, it's important to do so responsibly and ethically.
Well said. I think it's time to take a step back and think about everything we've learned. From those tiny cellular mechanisms to the potential for new therapies and the ethical considerations that come with them, this has been a truly fascinating exploration. When we come back, I'd love to wrap up our discussion with some final thoughts on what the future might hold for HIF enhancer pathway research and, well, for all of us. Stay tuned. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the HIF enhancer pathway. You know, it's amazing to think about all the things we've uncovered about this tiny pathway, from those cellular first responders to the potential for, like, regenerating entire tissues. It's clear that this pathway is essential for, well, for all of us. But as we've been discussing, with great power comes great responsibility. And manipulating something as fundamental as our body's response to oxygen definitely raises some ethical questions.
Absolutely. As we continue to learn more about the HIF enhancer pathway and develop new ways to influence it, we need to be very careful and think about the ethical applications of our actions.
So let's talk more about those ethical considerations. We've touched on the possibility of unintended consequences. But what other things should we be thinking about when we talk about, manipulating a system that's so crucial for our survival?
One really important thing is to make sure that everyone has access to any therapies that might come out of this research. If we figure out how to enhance healing or regenerate tissues or even potentially extend lifespan by working with the HIF enhancer pathway, we need to make sure that these advancements are available to everyone, not just a select few.
That's a really important point. We see this all the time in healthcare, where access to new treatments often depends on things like socioeconomic status or where you live. So how can we make sure that these potential breakthroughs don't just make existing inequalities even worse?
It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer. It'll take a multifaceted approach. We need to think about affordability, accessibility, and education. We could implement policies to keep the prices of these therapies fair, invest in healthcare infrastructure in underserved areas, and make sure communities are aware of the potential benefits of these new treatments.
Those are all great ideas. It's so important to start having these conversations now before these therapies become a reality, so we can lay the groundwork for equitable access from the beginning. But beyond just access, are there other ethical considerations we should keep in mind?
Absolutely. Another big concern is the line between therapy and enhancement. We've been talking about how manipulating the HIF enhancer pathway could be revolutionary for treating diseases and helping people heal. But what if we start using this knowledge to, boost athletic performance or cognitive function in healthy people? Where do we draw the line?
Those are some really tough questions, and I don't think there are easy answers. It seems like this is a discussion that needs to involve not just scientists, but also ethicists, policymakers, and society as a whole.
Exactly. We need to come together to establish clear guidelines and boundaries for how we use this knowledge responsibly.
It's a good reminder that progress isn't just about pushing the boundaries of what's scientifically possible. It's also about thinking carefully about the ethical implications of what we discover. Well, this deep dive into the HIF enhancer pathway has been an incredible journey. We've gone from exploring those intricate cellular mechanisms to talking about groundbreaking potential therapies and the ethical considerations that come with them. It's clear that this research is still in its early stages, but the possibilities are both thrilling and a little bit daunting.
I agree. It really speaks to our human curiosity and our drive to understand the world around us and ourselves. I have no doubt that as we continue to explore these mysteries, we're going to find even more fascinating connections and potential applications.
And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to keep learning and exploring. Science is a never-ending journey of discovery, and the more we learn, the more we realize how much we still have to uncover. That's what makes it so exciting. So keep asking questions, keep searching for knowledge, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to make the next big breakthrough in this amazing field. Until next time, keep diving deep.